All right, we are going to finish the book. All we have left is the afterword. Then we're going to take the AR test today, and tomorrow we will fill in a couple things on our slideshow together, and then you will have until Wednesday to complete your slideshow, okay? So today we're going to finish. We're going to take the AR quiz, call it a day, okay? So we had finished the book yesterday, but we have this lovely afterword. Page 237. Although Bud Not Buddy is fictional, many of the situations Bud encountered are based on events that occurred in the 1930s during a time known as the Great Depression. And although the characters in Bud Not Buddy are fictional as well, some of them too are based on real people. One of the most enjoyable parts of writing that an author can combine his or her imagination with traits of real people to build new characters. So now that we know this is a fictional book, but they are based off of things, real events that did happen, which makes this what type of genre? Yeah, it's fiction book. I just said that. What type of a fiction book? It's Mrs. Knifel's favorite. Morgan? Realistic fiction. Because what happened in this book, totally possible. This is what I did to create the characters of Lefty Lewis and Hermione Calloway, both of whom are loosely based on my grandfathers. My mother's father, Earl Lefty Lewis, was one of the 6 or 7 redcaps who worked at the train station in Grand Rapids, Michigan during much of the Depression. The jobs of Pullman Porter and redcap were among the few open to African-American men at that time and carried a certain prestige in the Black community, meaning like an important thing. Nevertheless, they were extremely difficult jobs, often marked by 80-hour work weeks, low salary, and virtually no job security. These men could be fired for simply not looking happy enough. Grandpa Lewis did exceptionally well during the Depression, supporting his family on the tips he received as a redcap. My mother remembers that my grandmother used to sew reinforced lining in the pockets of all my grandpa's pants because the weight of the pennies, nickels, and dimes and occasional quarters that he was given as tips would eventually rip the seams out. She also remembers the leathery texture Grandpa's hands took on from carrying so much baggage at the station. As the Depression deepened, the Grand Rapids train station cut back to 2 redcaps, and Grandpa was let go. He briefly opened a small restaurant and finally became the first African-American cab driver in Grand Rapids, a job he held until he retired in 1972 at 74 years old. Earl Lefty Lewis also pitched for many years in the minors of the Negro Baseball League. His fondest memories at the time was pitching 12 against Satchel Paige. As he did with most opposing pitchers, Satchel hung Grandpa with 2 losses. My father's father, Herman E. Curtis, was indeed a big band leader for most of his adult life. He headed many different musical groups, and my favorite being Herman E. Curtis and the Dusky Devastators of the Depression, a name that by itself deserves 6 of those exclamation points. Grandpa attended the Indiana Conservatory of Music and was classically trained violinist. He also played the bass, fiddle, accordion, and the piano. Entertainment was an important part of life during the Depression. For people who wanted to forget their troubles by going to the movies, sitting around the radio, and listening and dancing to live music. Grandpa and his band were well known throughout Michigan during this time. Being an orchestra leader was Grandpa Curtis's night job. By day, he wore many different hats. Among them, those were chauffeur, that's people who drive people around, boat captain, and truck painter. He owned several businesses in Grand Rapids and Wyoming. Michigan at the time had laws prohibited African Americans from renting or holding titles to land in these 2 cities. Grandpa did this by having a white friend put his name on all the records, just like Hermione Calloway had a white member of his band. The flexibility, people skills, and hustle and willingness to work around unfair laws and situations that both We're going to come back to those in a second, those pictures. Both my grandfather youths allowed them to keep their families together during one of America's bleakest periods in times that was especially hard on African Americans. Both of these men were fortunate and skilled enough to avoid the brunt of the Great Depression. The lives of Earl Lefty Lewis and Hermione Curtis and the situations described in Bud Not Buddy are the exception, for the great majority of people suffered horribly during the period between 1929 and 1941. Parents could often not feed their children, so countless thousands of young people, some as young as 8 years old, were abandoned or had to be set on their own in search of a meal and a warm place to sleep. These children survived the brutal life on the road by riding the rails, picking fruit, doing odd jobs, begging, stealing, or whatever was necessary to get food. Much of what I discovered about the Depression I learned through research and books, which is a shame. I didn't take advantage of the family history that surrounded me for many years. I'm afraid that when I was younger and my grandparents and parents would start to talk about their lives during the Depression, my eyes would glaze over and I'd think, oh no, not those boring tall tales again. And I'd find the most convenient excuse I could get away from them. Now I feel real sorrow when I think of all the knowledge, wisdom, and stories that have been forever lost with the deaths of my grandparents. Be smarter than I was. Go talk to your grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and other relatives and friends. Discover and remember what they had to say about what they learned growing up. Be keeping their stories alive. You make them and yourself immortal. I want you to turn back to the pictures. The picture on the above of the band, it says Herman F. Curtis and the Dusky Devastators of the Depression. Herman is at the left with the bow. So that was the author's real grandfather, and he is who Hermione Calloway is based off of. And then on the other page is Earl Lefty Lewis, the pitcher for the Grand Rapids, Michigan Elsteries, taken May 30th, 1918. So that is her other grandfather, who Lefty Lewis is based off of. So once again, this is realistic fiction. I hope you enjoyed this book as much as I did. I absolutely loved it. So before I let people go at home and you guys, your job today is to take the AR quiz. When you are done, you're going to walk to me and show me your score so I can record it. If you have not yet done your book title or your chapter titles, that needs to be done and turned in today. That has to get done. And then tomorrow, we will go over the slideshow again and fill in a few things, okay? So after you finish book titles and the AR quiz, you may just read or go on study island, okay? So long, those of you at home, ta-ta.